Every dragon strives to fit in, but what is socially acceptable? Hi, I'm your host Heatwave, and in today's lore episode, I'll be exploring the basics on accepted dragon culture, customs, and traditions that are used and upheld all over the Empire. Hey yourself. Did you fall from the sky? Because your eyes are like shooting stars. That's the best you got? Okay, Sandwing, let's say you have my attention. Let's hope you can keep it. Welcome back to the Wings of Fire spin-off series Empire of Pareena. In today's lore episode, I'll be diving into common practices, culture, traditions, and customs upheld by the wider population of Pareena. Post-war of unification, it would take time to establish a common culture. Each winglet has its own unique identity and beliefs, but we actually don't know how long dragons have been on Pareena. But the point is, a unified Pareena brought change, and change isn't universally accepted. So it took time for dragons to shake off the shackles of what they had perceived for so long. Before the War of Unification, though, most interactions between winglets were basically business, with the trade being the only reason anyone spoke outside their winglet. Of course, you have the outliers, like the Mudwing Rainwing Collective. The idea of other winglets living alongside each other was kinda not heard of. But as the Empire grew, and grew, and grew, to what we see today, so did a sense of common culture. This was brought about by two changes the Empire adopted. The first was a lack of borders. While yes, each region had a border, dragons were free to cross them and explore, without the risk of being captured or killed, allowing them to have more interactions with other dragons from other winglets. The second was that the Empire valued unity, so it created places for dragons to come together, like the first city. Over time, each winglet mingled and socialized on a scale not before seen, so did arise a common form of greeting, of speaking, interacting with each other, and sharing resources. This helped shape a lot of things we see in Pareena today, like shared feasting halls or community bathhouses. The dragons of Pareena began to socialize a lot more, and while yes, you'll find sandwings living in sandwing natural territory, the words they speak, the way they greet, the mere fact that they can share a meal with an icewing sitting across from them shows that isolation, that's a thing of the past. In fact, some circumstances, many common practices or customs were shared all across Pareena well before they even became commonplace or knew they came commonplace. Now, this is just a brief overview and follow-up of the last culture episode I did. Everything in this episode can be explained further with its own episode going into history, trends, production, and how it fits into the wider culture of Pareena. For example, things like sports, games, fashionable fabrics will all be covered in a separate episode dedicated to that aspect. To narrow it down, I'll be exploring the basics of things like slang, relationships, social standards, traditional celebrations held across Pareena, social settings, how they handle gold or what gold means to them, and how they interact with the four principles. So without further ado, I'll start with relationships. Dragons have all kinds of relationships, family or friends, but I'll be focusing on the romantic relationship. First of all, it's safe to say that most dragons are actually bisexuals. They can both comfortably be with male and female, no matter if they are a male or female. Some dragons may switch between the two over their lifetime, even if it's only to have dragonettes. Dragons of Pareena don't really have a bonding system. Some dragons engage in ceremonial marriage, while others will just use the correct terms to refer to their lifelong partner. But it's generally a social rule that one dragon can only be in one romantic relationship at a time. The expectation is only when having dragonettes with another that they may not be in a relationship with. A dragon can have up to 3 to 4 relationships throughout their lifetime, but most settle down with one. To note, there is no social standard or stigma around dragons having relationships with other winglets, but typically a dragon will form a romantic relationship with another dragon of the same winglet. This ties into my next topic of how dragons show affection. This has been a common practice even way before the Empire. The first is booping snouts together, typically done by one dragon acting as the dominant by pushing their snout to the significant other. There is then the tail twine, where two dragons wrap their tails together, and finally a wing brush, where a dragon will gently brush the outer side of their wing against another's. All these physical indicators mean the same thing: love, appreciation, happiness, relief. Really, any positive emotion can be tied to these physical body language, and it's used by dragonettes, males, females, mating partners, and even with friends. Me and my wife engage in some different ways of showing affection, but we won't be talking about that. Now let's talk about language and formal practices. It's expected that dragons, especially dragonettes, are to address other dragons with titles like Sir or Miss. Formally, dragons should bow to a dragon of another higher authority, like the Imperator or a member of the government. A dragon must bow to a custodii. Informally, dragons use everyday slang to communicate, but this is mostly common by the lower educated dragons of Pareena, those who aren't that bright, but you can find examples of slang used anywhere. So, a few examples that I have here are tooth, someone who is clean, respectful, and responsible. It refers to how a tooth is straight and clean. Zesty, sour or in a bad mood. Pretty teeth. Depending on the context, this can either mean a dragon obsessed with their own appearance, or someone who can bluff their way out of anything. Salty scales, that's slang for a sea wing. Sweet and salty is slang for an attractive sea wing. Fruit salad is slang for a rain wing. Scrambled egg is slang for a hybrid. Nesting is slang for expecting female. And then meaty, slang for a large or chunky dragon. Can even mean mudwing sometimes. Of course, these are just examples of some of the many different slangs that are spoken. Some regions, some towns, may have a local flavor of slang they use to refer to specific things. From slang, I just want to quickly touch on clothing. Now, this will be covered in a further episode, but dragons wear all sorts of fabrics, from simple bags and satchels for carrying extra stuff, to elegant flowing bakamas and silk dress trains. Most dragons wear simple clothing, bandanas in imperial blue, but dragons can acquire clothing and accessories for hotter and colder climates. But I will speak of this later in its own episode. This ties in well into dragons and how they culturally handle gold. While the currency of the Empire deserves its own episode, basically, dragons like gold. They like hoarding it, wearing it. A majority of dragons, no matter the winglet, tend to melt down their gold to make things like rings, piercings, pendants, charms. Of course, it's not just gold they use, silver and jewels are just as good. It adds a much needed bling to the once dull exterior of a dragon and is more commonly worn than any other fabric or clothing. Now let's discuss some national celebrations that are held across Pareena. The first is the Spring Awakening Celebration Festival. This celebration is held all across Pareena, in all major cities and settlements. It's to celebrate the world conducting a full cycle around its celestial body. Essentially, it's to celebrate a new year in Pareena. It's full of colour and culture, music and food. It's to celebrate the birth of spring and the new life that is brought with the season, like the majority of dragon hatchlings. The new spring celebration means different things to different dragons, but to everyone it means feasting, drinking, and having a pleasant time with the kin around you. Another celebration is Empire Day, also known as the Unification Day or the Empire's Hatching Day. This day represents the forming of the Empire and the unification of all dragons across Pareena. While it's celebrated all over the Empire, it's in the first city that a real spectacle is put on. The Imperial Army, the Imperial Custodii, and the Imperator themselves will march through the first city to massive crowds. The Imperator will then stay and meet with common dragons. It's a real honor to brush wings with the Imperator. Along with the military march, a single artillery company of the Imperial Army will conduct a gun salute. Outside of the first city, using up to 15 Earthshaker guns, this ceremonial troop will fire the first 5 guns, and then wait, before firing the next 5. And then they fire the final 5. Each salvo represents the 3 cycles of war that were held during the War of Unification. One national celebration that was just recently added is the Victory in the Mojave, or Victory over the Red Sands. This celebration is more of a remembrance of those who gave their lives in upholding the sword. 2 celebrations are held, one in the first city and one over on the border of the Losine Gap. On the border of the Losine Gap stands a marble stone statue of an inductii. Placed there post-war, many dragons visit the statue and lay flowers down by its base. The monument serves as a reminder to those who gave everything to the Empire and their kin. It also stands guard, ever watching over the Losine Gap. The second part of the celebration is much alike to Empire Day. There is a military march, a gun salute for the 5 cycles of the war, and the Imperator will meet with Imperial Army veterans to hear their stories of glory and of horror. In front of the Imperial Palace is a las arm, driven bayonet first into the ground. Placed on top is an inductii's helmet. This once belonged to Inductii Salamander of the 1st Line Battalion. He was awarded with 2 accounts of the winged sword, along with 7 onyx helixes. The Mudwing held off an entire enemy platoon by himself at Oberboisky Heights, where he was wounded 7 times before being relieved by further elements of the 1st. He didn't survive the war, but his armor was recovered, and because of his sacrifice and gallantry, he serves as a memorial to those who have fought and died. Many dragons pay their respect by laying flowers by this memorial. Now, I mentioned that during some of these celebrations, there is a lot of drinking and feasting. So where do these activities come from? Where do dragons go? Well, if you remember back to my episode on the civil service, I mentioned that the department operates communal feasting, sleeping, and bathing spaces. Now, these facilities are all really located in the first city, as its industrialization and urbanism means there is a lack of available prey and independent living spaces. While other parts of Pareena do have communal amenities, they are typically on a smaller scale and handled by the locals who make it. So, as I keep saying, the communal bathhouses allow dragons to keep up their hygiene. Feasting halls allow dragons to acquire a free meal befitting their diet, and this space is where most dragons choose to socialize. And there is the sleeping spaces, where dragons can obviously store their personal items and sleep. But one establishment that's actually privately owned are bars, or pubs, as sea wings call them. Here dragons too can socialize over something stronger than drinking water. Alcohol affects dragons differently, so they can drink a lot more of it. Typically, the most common alcohol other than wine is rum. Imperial rum is a 40% alcoholic spirit made from the bitterroot vein, a subfamily of ginger but with a fouler taste. For the past 700 cycles, distilled bitterroot was used to disinfect wounds, but some dragon thought, why not drink it? And here we have it. Dragons do have a strong drinking culture. It's one of our favorite. I mean, I enjoy a few drinks. Just a few, of course. Not like that one time. And the law enforcers get to flog those dragons who are engaging in drunken behavior. Always a good sight to see. I'll wrap up common culture by looking at how dragons culturally hold up the four principles of the Empire. They do this pretty easy on their own, actually. The first one is very easy. Dragons uphold the sword by simply joining the Imperial Army. Of course, it's not for everyone, but it's one of the simplest ways to uphold the sword. To uphold the quill is also quite simple. Dragons are known for writing everything down, from a simple time to remember throughout their day to documenting great triumphs. To uphold the scroll, it's expected that dragons follow common law. And they do. And finally, culturally, dragons uphold the cog by simply making useful things on their own. Most fabrics are made by the dragons who wear it, for example. These basic cultural tropes and customs among dragons goes talon in talon with the cultures of the wider dragon winglets. But it's not the end of dragon culture. No, don't worry. There is still plenty more to cover. Thanks for watching. Please remember to leave a comment, like, or subscribe to help the algorithm present this content to a wider audience. And don't forget the channel goals with special rewards. This is Heatwave, signing off.